Okay, well great. Why don't we go ahead and get started. I want to welcome all of you to your IECP training. This is the first training in a series of trainings that are going to be covering child abuse and prevention. So today we're going to just lay the foundation for you. We're going to be talking about reporting laws. Specifically, what are you responsible for when you're out in the field? I really want you to know the nuances of the law, what's out there. I want you to be familiar with the types of abuse, what would qualify as emotional abuse, physical abuse, that kind of thing. And toward the end of the day, we'll be having a little bit of a, just kind of checking bases with you to see if you guys were able to get all the content we covered, because it is going to be quite a bit of content. Hopefully, today will be more of a review that you would have had. Some of this, it won't be the very first time that you're hearing about it, but it is a solid training that's going to cover child abuse and what that involves and what that is, okay? Just real quickly, again, this is a training specifically designed for Junior Blind's Early Childhood Infant Program, and we have been funded by a grant from First 5 LA to provide these trainings to you. So this is one aspect of the trainings. Another piece of the trainings will be specifically regarding parenting issues, and how can we alleviate some of the stresses on parents that could possibly lead to child abuse. So that's a whole other kind of division of training. So this one's going to be specific to child abuse prevention. Okay, any questions about that? I just want you guys to be clear that you're going to have these sort of two training tracks that we've been very happily funded through First 5 to be able to provide. Okay. Usually I like to start with an agenda, so you have an idea of, okay, what exactly are we covering? Just so you know, I don't have the PowerPoint available for you today. However, Laura can make it available to you. I think she is putting all of these in a folder that you'll have access to, so you can go back to it at any time to review it. Okay. So for today's training agenda, we're going to review, okay, what is child abuse? Okay, what defines that? What are the types? What are the indicators of abuse? History of Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act, also known as CANRA. Okay, so you're going to hear that word a lot, CANRA. That's an acronym for the Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act that I want you to become very familiar with because it does impact your work. And reporting child abuse. Okay, I'll be asking and throwing out questions to you regarding reporting child abuse. In this incident, would you report? In this incident, would you report? Okay, so we'll be kind of looking at that towards the tail end of today. So that's our agenda. Some objectives for you. At the end of the day, I'd like you to be able to identify types of abuse. Again, all relevant to everything you're getting today, nothing thrown in that you wouldn't have been presented on. And potential indicators of each. Again, potential indicators, okay? Understanding what is reportable under CANRA, okay? So again, being very familiar with the nuances of that law. And understanding the reporting process, because it is a process, okay? You have your piece in the process, and so do other different entities that are involved in that process. Okay, so those are the objectives. So let's first define what we mean by child abuse. Okay, and I have a couple different definitions up here, but pretty much I want you to be familiar with all of these. Any act that results in physical injury inflicted by other than accidental means, on a child by another person. So if it's an accident, it's not defined as child abuse. Okay, and there's many accidents that people and families have in their homes. There's children that accidentally fall and have head injuries, or get burned and have burns, or different things. Willful cruelty or unjustifiable punishment. These are the terms that are used in the law. Willful means there's an intention to hurt. Okay, unjustifiable punishment. Basically, the punishment doesn't actually fit. It goes beyond, okay, what most people would consider would be justifiable punishment. And these are some nuances in the law that actually at our next training, which is next week, we're going to go into even more detail. on some statistics and other things, and also a little bit more about the law. Unlawful corporal punishment. Basically, unlawful, okay, is something that's not legal. Corporal punishment has to do more with physical punishment. Okay. So these are some of the definitions, and again, we're going to provide this to you, so you don't have to, note down every single thing, or I just want you to kind of, try to take in what you can, absorb it, and get a more conceptually what we're talking about. So corporal punishment versus unlawful corporal punishment. Now the reason I wanted to put this in here is because oftentimes I run into people that think that corporal punishment, which is basically any kind of physical punishment, they think that you cannot do that. You cannot do that under the law. Actually, corporal punishment is allowable under our law, okay? So I want you to be aware of that. But there's what's called unlawful corporal punishment. So let's take a look at what I have here to sort of clarify. Corporal punishment becomes abuse when it involves unreasonably, and I know that could be very vague for us, unreasonably severe or unjustifiable punishment inflicted with enough force to cause internal or external injury. Okay, this is where it gets sometimes a little bit iffy, because there's some parents that definitely use corporal punishment, and there's others that may feel, that's very severe. What if the child, ended up in the emergency room? Okay, wouldn't that be considered, not justifiable? Okay, and so what happens is some of these cases are the ones that actually go to court. Okay, because parents actually can opt to use corporal punishment, but there can be that sort of gray area that if their child does end up with internal or external injuries that seem beyond what would be acceptable, okay, beyond the norm actually, because that's really what we're going by, then in fact they could lose their children as a result of that. Okay, but I do want you to know that there is a distinction between the two, that the law doesn't say, hey, don't hit your children. Oftentimes social workers and psychologists may actually recommend that parents don't, and especially when they're angry, hit their children for other reasons. It models aggression, right? Oftentimes, they're angry, so it's uncontrollable, so you don't know how hard you're hitting. You could pull their arm and, pull their arm out of the socket, you can break bones, that kind of thing. And that definitely would become unlawful corporal punishment. So oftentimes people in the field just recommend, don't even go there. Okay, it's better not to use other means, and when we talk about the parenting training, we'll be going into what are more acceptable forms, okay, of consequences and punishments to put in place. It doesn't have to be physical. Types of child abuse. Physical, definitely, that's more evident, more blatant, right? Emotional, want you to consider that. Okay, sometimes, and I've certainly observed this myself with parents, you have parents that call their children names, sometimes very, very bad names, cussing at them, put them down, degrade them in front of other people. Okay, that could potentially qualify under emotional abuse, especially if it's on a consistent basis. That's a pattern of how they relate to their child. Okay, that definitely will provide or impact the child in a harmful way. Sexual abuse, and we're going to cover what that includes, and neglect. Okay, and we're going to cover what neglect includes, because that's a huge area. In fact, most of the child abuse cases fall under neglect. Okay, so physical abuse. Again, emphasizing any injury to a child that is not accidental. Okay, so if the parent says, oh, it was an accident, he fell, okay, right away, that's what they're reporting, so that has to be considered. Because if it's found to be an accident, okay, then definitely it wouldn't constitute as abuse. So what are some things that could potentially lead to what we call physical abuse? Hitting, slapping, biting, burning, punching, shaking, okay, all the physical interactions that can occur when you're parenting a child that could result in abuse. Okay, what are some more typical physical injuries that we might see? And definitely in emergency rooms across the nation, they're familiar with certain injuries that really are not, wouldn't be normal childhood injuries, that actually are more indicative of an abusive situation. So they're on alert to report, okay, to the Child Protective Services, which it's named differently in every state. Okay, we have Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS, and other states that may be called something else, but every state has that type of entity, okay, that would check this out. Typical physical injuries resulting from child abuse may be injuries to the back surface of the child's body, injuries to the face, injuries to multiple parts of the body. Okay, so typically children that fall on the playground, get their knees scuffed up, that kind of thing, your elbows scuffed up, those are typical, they're sort of typical childhood injuries, but these would be more in places that might be more potential of being an abuse case. Okay, again, we don't know for sure, okay, it would have to be checked out, but it's just the potential's there. Injuries to the shins, elbows, knees, and forehead are not typically a stain from abuse. Okay, again, not typically. Okay, so we're just going by probability. Okay, so we mentioned already some of the physical indicators, and those are more blatant, they're more evident, right? You may see bruising, okay, under a child's eye, right? Redness, swelling, marks, head injuries, fractured, broken bones. Okay, these are all just some of the potential physical injuries. But what about behavioral? What are some behavioral indicators of abuse? Well, behavioral indicators that are kind of correlated is what we call connected to physical abuse. Difficulty walking or sitting. So the child is complaining about, which this is the child that didn't have any mobility problems before. Walking or, so now they're complaining about that. Walking or sitting. That, again, these things, I just want you to be alert to them. You know, it's not normal. Tries to hide injuries. Okay, so you happen to notice it, but maybe on their part, there's some resistance to show that. They're actually trying to disguise that or hide that. Appear to be frightened of parents. Okay, that they really, no, you know, they really don't want to go home. They want to stay. Clingy. Okay, so maybe, and this may be a child, again, that didn't have this behavior so much before, but now you're noticing they're much more clingy and needy, you know, okay, particularly around the adults with them. Or shrinks at approaching adults. So sometimes you get the two there, okay, kind of overly clingy, or the other, the opposite of that. Okay, so again, in and of itself, by themselves, it doesn't mean that this equals abuse. Oh, they're complaining about walking, they're abused. No, we're just gathering information, okay? It's investigating, it's information, and that's what we're going by. But if the kid has bruising and swelling and they're scared of their parents, right, and all of those things, then we might say, wait a minute, okay, and you might want to gather some more information, but it appears that that might be the case. What about spanking? And again, I want to be clear on this. Spanking, again, is corporal punishment. And we said that corporal punishment is allowed. Okay, it really is allowed under the law. But what we remind parents of is you need to be careful, because oftentimes, again, out of anger is typically when you're punishing your child. And so it could really go beyond what would be reasonable and could actually end up being more abusive. So oftentimes we try to get parents to use other means, like I said, instead of physical punishment. But in California, parents do have the right to use spanking, because you may hear otherwise, okay, as a means of disciplining a child. So long as the spanking is reasonable, and again, you know, there's some terms in here that, again, what's reasonable to me might not be unreasonable to you as a parent. So sometimes that's where some of these cases go into court, because the parent may have thought it's reasonable. That's how I was raised, you know. But, you know, in a court of law, it may not seem reasonable to most people.